Nuclear energy generates efficient and dependable electricity all around the world. Today, over 400 commercial reactors are in operation in over 30 countries. You could be for or against the controversial energy source, but do you actually understand how it works? Let's find out. So, how does it work? Let's begin with what exactly is a light water reactor, the base of a nuclear plant. The underlying idea here is astonishingly simple. It uses an artificial chain reaction to heat water. Nuclear fission generates millions of times more energy than any chemical reaction. Neutrons strike extremely heavy elements on the verge of stability, such as uranium-235. Although the neutron is absorbed, the consequence is unstable. Most of the time, it immediately separates into fast-moving, lighter elements, some extra free neutrons, and radiation energy. The radiation heats the surrounding water, and the neutrons repeat the process with additional atoms, releasing more neutrons and radiation in a tightly controlled chain reaction, in stark contrast to the explosive, destructive runaway reaction of an atomic bomb. A moderator is required in our light water reactor to control the energy of the neutrons. Simple, everyday water performs the job, which is really convenient because water is used to power the turbines anyhow. Because it is simple and inexpensive, the light water reactor has become popular. It is not, however, the safest, most efficient, or technically elegant nuclear reactor. Next, we have the discovery. It all began in the 1940s. Following the shock and horror of the war and the use of the atomic bomb, nuclear energy promised to be a harmless byproduct of modern technology, assisting the globe in regaining its footing. Everyone's imagination was out of control. Would electricity become free? Could nuclear power aid in the settlement of the Antarctic? Would nuclear-powered cars, planes, or houses exist? This appeared to be only a few years of hard work away. One thing was certain: the future would be nuclear. And now for the development. Only a few years later, there was something of an atomic-era hangover. It turned out that nuclear power was both complicated and expensive. Turning physics into engineering was simple on paper, but difficult in practice. Furthermore, commercial corporations considered nuclear power to be far too dangerous an investment, preferring to continue with gas, coal, and oil. Many people, however, did not simply want to abandon the promise of the atomic age. An exciting new technology, the prospect of enormously cheap electricity, the prospect of independence from oil and gas imports, and, in some cases, a secret desire to possess atomic weapons provided strong motivation to continue. Nuclear power had its finest hour in the early 1970s, when the war in the Middle East led global oil prices to surge. Now, business interest and investment are increasing at an alarming rate. Between 1970 and 1985, more than half of all nuclear reactors in the world were built. But with so many distinct types to select from, which reactor should be built? The day was won by a surprising underdog candidate, the light water reactor. It wasn't really creative, and it wasn't particularly popular among scientists, but it had several significant advantages. It was there, it worked, and it wasn't prohibitively expensive. Now, onto the decline. The nuclear frenzy lasted only a decade. In 1979, the 3 Mile Island nuclear reactor in Pennsylvania narrowly avoided a disaster when its core melted. The Chernobyl tragedy directly threatened Central Europe with a radioactive cloud in 1986, and the drawn-out Fukushima disaster spurred new talks and concerns in 2011. While 218 new nuclear power reactors went online in the 1980s, their number and nuclear's global share of energy production have stagnated since the end of the decade. Up next, a present-day dilemma. So, how is the situation now? Nuclear energy now accounts for around 10% of global energy demand. In 31 nations, there are around 439 nuclear reactors. In 2015, over 70 nuclear reactors are under construction, the majority of them in rapidly developing countries. In total, 116 additional reactors are planned around the world. Most nuclear reactors were designed using outdated technologies more than 25 years ago. More than 80% are different types of light water reactors. Many countries are now faced with a choice: replace outdated reactors, maybe with more efficient but less tested ones, or abandon nuclear power in favor of newer or older technology with varying cost and environmental implications. Why we shouldn't use nuclear power. Nuclear weapons proliferation. Only 1 year after the world's first nuclear test explosion in 1944, nuclear technology made a violent arrival onto the world stage. 2 major cities were destroyed by just 2 single bombs. Following that, reactor technology gradually progressed as a means of producing power, but it has always been inextricably linked with nuclear weapons technology. Without access to reactor technology, it is practically impossible to manufacture nuclear weapons. In truth, The Nuclear Non-Proliferation Pact has had minimal success in spreading nuclear reactor technology without spreading nuclear weapons. In the last 4 decades, 5 countries have built their own weapons using reactor technology. The truth is that it can be difficult to distinguish between a covert nuclear weapons development and the peaceful usage of nuclear energy. In the 1970s, the major nuclear powers cheerfully sold peaceful technology to smaller countries, which eventually constructed their own weapons. The path to lethal nuclear weapons is always paved with peaceful nuclear reactors. Nuclear waste and pollution. Not only is spent nuclear fuel radioactive, but it also contains exceedingly toxic chemical components, such as plutonium. It gradually loses its toxicity over tens of thousands of years, and there is also a procedure known as reprocessing, which involves the extraction of plutonium from spent nuclear fuel. It can be used for 2 things: to manufacture nuclear bombs or to create fresh fuel. But very little of it is used as fuel because we don't have the necessary reactors. A milligram will kill you. A few kilograms will produce an atomic weapon, and even an inconspicuous country like Germany has masses of it hanging around since reprocessing sounded like a good idea decades ago. And where will all the waste end up? We tried to bury it when dumping it into the water was prohibited, but we couldn't identify a location where it would be safe for tens of thousands of years. Over 30 countries operate over 400 reactors that manage hundreds of thousands of tons of nuclear waste, but only one is serious about establishing a permanent civilian waste storage facility: Finland. Accidents and disasters. 7 catastrophic accidents in reactors or facilities dealing with nuclear waste have occurred in the 60 years of nuclear power use. 3 of these were mostly contained, while 4 emitted considerable amounts of radiation into the environment. Large swaths of land in Russia, Ukraine, and Japan were rendered unfit for human settlement in 1957, 1987, and 2011. The exact number of deaths is unknown, although it is likely to be in the thousands. These incidents occurred with very different types of nuclear reactors in very different countries and decades apart. When we look at the facts, we have to ask ourselves, is 10% of the world's energy supply worth a cataclysmic tragedy over 30 years? Is 30% worth another Fukushima or Chernobyl somewhere on the planet every 10 years? What region would have to be poisoned in order for us to say no more? Where is the line drawn? Why we should use nuclear power? Nuclear energy saves lives. According to a NASA report published in 2013, nuclear energy has saved around 1.8 million lives. Even when the mortality counts from Chernobyl and Fukushima are taken into account, nuclear energy ranks bottom in terms of death per energy unit produced. While nuclear waste is extremely dangerous, it is typically preserved, whereas poisonous byproducts of fossil fuels are poured into the air we breathe every day. So, simply by limiting the amount of fossil fuels consumed, numerous cases of cancer and lung disease, as well as coal mine accidents, have been avoided. If we can choose between putting a lot of dangerous things in a deep hole and putting a lot of dangerous stuff in the atmosphere, the former seems more sensible. Nuclear energy only appears to be far riskier. Single catastrophic occurrences stay with us, whereas coal and oil murder quietly. It's comparable to the fatality rate of flying versus driving. Even in the best case scenario, switching to 100% renewable energy would take at least 40 years. So as long as we use fossil fuels, nuclear energy will save much more lives than it will damage. Nuclear energy reduces CO2 emissions. Nuclear energy, in terms of climate change, is arguably far less destructive to the environment than fossil fuels, our primary source of energy. Nuclear energy has prevented the release of approximately 64 gigatons of greenhouse gases since 1976. That might equal to an additional 80 to 240 gigatons by the mid-20th century. Humanity's energy usage is continually increasing. According to U.S. official forecasts, China will build the equivalent of a new 600-megawatt coal plant every 10 days for the next 10 years. Every year, China consumes 4 billion tons of coal. Coal is inexpensive, plentiful, and easily accessible. As a result, it is unlikely that humans will abandon it very soon. Nuclear energy may be the only solution to mitigate the consequences of climate change and avoid a disastrous man-made global warming. Nuclear energy is relatively clean in comparison to other things we do. So, even if it is a good idea to abandon nuclear energy in the long run, it may be a better solution for the next 100 years or so when compared to the alternatives. So, while we cannot be certain that alternative nuclear technology will deliver on its promises, shouldn't we conduct additional research before passing up a potential to alleviate many of humanity's existing problems? And that's a wrap for this video. See you in the next one.